I got ADHD, baby. I set my goals, not your expectations, baby. I need my tools and a brain vacation, baby. Neurodivergent flow, no limitation, baby.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Um, so I was just telling my audience a little bit that we are getting into the topic today around neurodiversity in the workplace. Um, and so I'm really excited to chat about this topic for so many reasons. One, this is clearly the center of both of our work, right? And so if those that don't know me, I'm Megan Brown Enya. I work with women with ADHD and I help them thrive in the workplace and help them define success on their own terms and allow them to really utilize their AD strengths to meet their goals, right? And then we have Alice here. Alice, how do you pronounce it? Houston?
Houston. Yeah.
Yeah, Houston.
Yeah.
She is our guest here from all the way on the other side of the pond. And we're so glad. Thank you for taking the time, especially with all the different time zones, right? And so taking the time to talk with us. She is the author of Neurodiversity in the Workplace, and I'm so excited to have her here. Yes, thank you for showing your book. And if you don't have it, get it. And we'll talk a little bit more about it as well. But if you can introduce, I mean, I kind of introduced you a little bit, but if you can introduce the other things that I did not share and let our audience know who you are.
Yeah, of course. So my name's Alice Houston, and I'm author of Neurodiversity in the Workplace, as we've just sort of mentioned. I wrote this book, well, we're going to talk a little bit more about it, but I wrote this book because I felt that I joined the workplace, and for the first time in my life, and I was in my 30s at that point, I finally realised what inclusion meant, and I wanted to write a book about it. So I've got ADHD and dyspraxia, and I was diagnosed with ADHD in my 30s and dyspraxia as a child, so I've always known I was neurodivergent, but kind of really only in the last few years started to really understand my identity and what inclusion means for me, and I guess for other people too. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and I was diagnosed in my late 30s as well, and that's how I ended up starting my company too. ADHD at work is I just end up combining my experience in HR and operations and business, and then in social work and education, and then realizing that there are just so many people with ADHD that are just struggling in the workplace unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And there's just a mismatch of resources and tools and lack of education within the workplace in of itself that is causing a lot of unnecessary harm. So, being able to work with companies and individuals to make inclusive spaces is just a passion of mine at this point.
Yeah.
And so, and that's one of the areas, like, just to go in a little bit more context around like why you wrote your book and the angle that you chose to approach. When we talked about this offline, I really value that. So if you can share that with our audience.
Definitely. So there's lots and lots of books written about ADHD or neurodiversity and inclusion in work. You just have to Google or go on Amazon, you'll find them. But what I want to do is, a lot of these books, their angle is, you're the person with ADHD, you have to ask the employer for something. So if you're in the UK, it's reasonable adjustments, and I think in America it's accommodations. That
Yes.
yeah. So in the UK, we ask for reasonable adjustments. We have something called the Equality Act, and we have to ask, for changes in the work environment to accommodate our needs and to include us. But I wanted to take the angle that
you're breaking up. You're breaking up a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
You're breaking. Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit.
I'm trying to sort of stay close to my mic. So I wanted to take the angle for neurodivergent people to not have to ask for things, for it to be on the employer's responsibility. And I felt that it was the employer's responsibility to consider universal design, which is a concept around designing the workplace so that it is inclusive, so that neurodivergent people don't have to ask for things. They don't have to ask for changes in the work environment. They don't have to disclose the moment they start a job, because they feel safe, and they feel psychologically safe as well, and secure and able to thrive at work, which is all sort of kind of what you do as well, isn't it? About being your best self. And I felt that, so my book is very much written it's for everybody. It's for neurodivergent people. It's for employers. It's for anybody who loves a neurodivergent person, to be fair, around inclusion and wanting to include them in your life. But I really wanted to have that angle that employers need to take responsibility for inclusion. It shouldn't be down to us to disclose or fill in like equality and diversity forms and tell people, oh, my brain works a little bit differently and I'll need X,
Mhm.
Y, Z. So yes, I really wanted to have that kind of, and it's about systemic inclusion and looking at systems and looking at how we can redesign systems to make them inclusive of all brains. And at the minute, a lot of workplaces they're designed for neurotypical people. They're not designed
Mhm.
for neurodivergent ways of thinking. So it's about giving that employer sort of responsibility to take ownership of what can I do to make my design more inclusive so that everybody can feel valued and able to hit the ground running as soon as they start a job without having to wait for like adjustments to be approved essentially.
Right.
So yes, that was my kind of angle.
Yeah, and I love that because it's bringing some balance to the narrative that's out there around neurodiversity, right? And so, like, you're right. Like, there's a lot of content. Like, you're a neurodiverse person, like whatever, wherever you are within your neurodiversity, right? Like, you're just expected to change and expected to modify everything in order to make it work. But the reality is yes, there are things as the ADHD or we could do and strategies and like things that we can put in place in order to make things easier because our ADHD symptoms really do have an impact on what's going on. But at the same time, the environments that we're working in need to shift as well and recognize that there isn't one type of person that you build an organization around, but recognizing that you have a diverse group of people that have some different needs, and you do not have to make things harder for people unnecessarily. And that there needs to be some type of balance there. So I'm glad that you provided some content to the world around creating to balance it out. Because again, you're right. Like if you just Google ADHD and neurodiversity in the workplace, is majority of it is going to be about what you need to do as an individual to make it work.
And it's all about advocating for yourself, which is important. And I think I believe young people should be taught that given the tools to be able to effectively advocate for themselves. But it is
Mm-hmm.
a two-way process, and other people have to take responsibility for how do I include this person. There's a really analogy that I use that is in my book. So I use the analogy of booking a table at a restaurant. So most people, if you go out for a meal, you book a table, you don't ask for cutlery, you don't ask for a chair to
Mm-hmm.
enjoy your meal safely and comfortably. Though those things, those universal design things in terms of going out for a meal are always provided, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the same with the workplace. You shouldn't have to ask for things to feel safe and feel comfortable. You wouldn't be walking into a restaurant and sitting on the floor because you haven't had to ask for an adjustment of a chair. And so
Right.
it's that kind of concept, and it's a very basic concept, but you can apply that. Similarly, you wouldn't, if you're a manager and you're hiring for a job and a wheelchair user applies for your job, you wouldn't suddenly build a lift. Your lift would always be there,
Right.
and that's universal design. That is universal design for physical disability, which is also really important.
Right.
So I think it's really important just to think about what other design, how do we design other spaces to be inclusive of different things as well. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and recognizing that like when work environments prioritize being inclusive, it helps everybody, and it doesn't just help the person that they think that it was designed for, but it actually supports everyone within the space. And so yeah, thank you for bringing this subject up. But I know you mentioned one thing, but like thinking about what are like, I don't know, what would you say like the top five ways, or maybe top three things that employers or businesses can do in order to make work environments more inclusive?
oh, that's an interesting question. I think the one thing is speak to people with lived experience, get views. Don't just assume that you know everything. Don't assume that obviously we're talking about universal design, but everybody's got individual needs. So it's having that balance of respecting people's individual needs
Mm-hmm.
and having that universal design that can be the I guess the benchmark for how you can build inclusion onto that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, don't assume you know everything. Speak to people with lived experience. Be open to learning and be open
Mm-hmm.
to people challenging you. If you get things wrong, I'm sorry that I'm not doing my list very well, but I'll just
No, it's
carry on.
great.
But yeah. If you get things wrong, be open to people challenging you and being informed about how you could do things differently. And be open to unlearning as well. So obviously it's really important to learn, but you need to be open to unlearning and doing things, changing the way you do things or changing practices.
Mm-hmm.
I think also looking at policies and procedures. How do you make them inclusive? What can you
Mm-hmm.
do? Some people have a neurodiversity policy, not many people do. But even in your EDI policies, how can you incorporate neurodiversity within that as well, and have really think about that within your sort of overall inclusion. I think another really important thing is listening.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to your people who you line manage. If somebody says, for example, in terms of my ADHD, one thing that I need is a line manager to, if they're going to give me verbal instructions. So, for example, if they say, right, you've got to do these 5 things, and they tell me those verbally, I'll remember 2 of them, and then just like the last 3 will go out the window, and I won't do them. Not because I'm not committed or motivated, it's just because my short-term memory means that I've just
Right.
forgotten them. So what I need is essentially, So what I need is think back to
Yeah.
preparing.
Yeah.
And I'm very clear with all my line managers. I just, send me an email. You can talk to me. I'm happy to talk to you and have those meetings. But back things up in writing. So, for example, if somebody tells you a really basic thing, can you send me an email of those tasks? Don't have to listen and actually do that. Don't sort of have to be reminded by your employee to do that really, because there's been times in the past when I've had to say to line manager, oh, can you send me that list, or can you send me that in writing?
Mm-hmm.
So really just listen to what they need and really act on that. And I think the other thing is really just to kind of be open to sort of, I've said learning, but also just be open to difference, be
Mm-hmm.
open to understanding not the negatives, but also the positives. I tend not to like the term superpower as
Yeah, I don't like the
such.
term.
I know
I
some
don't like
people
the term
do.
either.
I know some people do sort of gravitate towards that, and I think that's a really individual thing. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I feel that recognizing the positives that like a neurodivergent brain can bring to the workplace is really, really important. And another thing, I think recruitment. I'm losing track here, but I'm just
Okay.
um, in recruitment, things like questions in advance. Provide the questions in advance for everybody. There isn't any reason why you shouldn't provide questions in advance, for example, because unless your job is you want to employ somebody who's great at interviews and
Right.
the job role is being able to answer questions really quickly, like on the spot. If that's the job role, then fair enough. You want to kind of test that somebody can do that, but most jobs aren't that. Most jobs don't involve being an interview every day. So providing the questions in advance is great for neurodivergent people, but it's just great for everybody. So really think about your inclusion, not just when somebody is working for you, but the whole process, thinking about recruitment, thinking about what can you do to make that process the most, because interviews are really a natural thing anyway, so how can you make it more comfortable and so that
Yeah.
people can feel safe. So having the questions, and that's one of the things that I need. I don't tend to need that many adjustments in terms of interviews. I say adjustments in sort of inverted commas because I didn't have to ask them, and it was all universally
Yeah.
designed for me, and it's like
Yeah.
there. But so really, what I question in advance for interviews, and sometimes if I'm doing a task or maybe it's a bit of extra time to process information, but it's not, and you'll notice all these things as I'm listing them, they're not going to break the bank of an organization. They're not going to.
Mm-hmm.
They don't cost a lot. Most of them are free.
Yeah, they
And that's it. Inclusion
don't
doesn't
cost
cost
a
a lot
lot.
of money.
Um,
Yeah.
There are so many things that you said that I wanted to just come and chime in on. So one, just recognizing that it is so important for organizations to create a psychologically safe environment, right? And so that involves a lot of different things. But when things specifically thinking about from the management and leadership perspective, it's understanding your own bias and how it's getting in the way. It's understanding what preconceptions and prejudgments or definitions that you have around professionalism or um, timeliness. So just anything, just being very clear about what it is that you mean when you're talking to somebody else, and checking your assumptions and also leading and managing without judgment. So like if somebody does need some extra time or they do need help with planning and prioritization, right? And so if somebody's asking you to help them prioritize, like, are you judging that person because of that? And then now you're looking at them as though they're not a solid employee, when your real job as a leader and a manager is to make sure that your employee, no matter who they are able to get the work done based on what it is that they need. And so I loved how you were talking about like how important it is for managers to and leaders to listen to their employees and to be able to ask questions and come from a place of curiosity versus a place of judgment and ridicule.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think because my last job, I had a really good relationship with my line manager, and she was wonderful, and she really cared. She really wanted to support me to develop. And this is kind of part of the inspiration to the book, because I had such a great relationship with her. And one thing she did with me, so I'd come with her with a question, and she'd turn it back to me and say, what do you think, Alice? What do you think? How? And it was sort of like kind of trying sort of solving the problem together, and that helped me learn as well. And I think that's really sort of so I sort of in terms of my workload, sort of learning, but also just kind of being there and having different ways of communication as well is really important for people. That kind of listening, but how are you going to listen? Because some people would prefer, if you use Microsoft Teams or Zooms, they might prefer like an instant message. Some people would prefer a video call. If you're in person, people might just want an in-person meeting or a phone call. And some people might prefer email. So it's understanding how your employee or the person you line manage prefers to communicate, and then respecting that and doing that as well. And that's how you get the best out of them, and listening to these little things. And they're not really little things. I say little, they're quite major. Like communication is the major thing. Yeah, like, like if you communicate with somebody in the wrong way, you're not going to get the outcome that you want, because you're not communicating the right way, are you? So yeah, so definitely, I think it's really important to obviously the universal design stuff, but then individual preferences and individual needs, and recognizing communication styles and what the individual needs as well, just so that you can, like you say, without judgment. And I think especially with ADHD, it's really, so I was diagnosed, lots of people are diagnosed, especially people who present as women, or identify as women, because we weren't diagnosed as kids, and a lot of people are diagnosed later because we're not the stereotypical 8-year-old hyperactive boy running around a classroom, just like, we're not that, and we don't look like ADHD. But I don't think ADHD has a look, to be fair.
No, it doesn't have a look, but like it in real life, it doesn't have a look, but how society presents ADHD definitely has a look, right? And so, and unfortunately, a lot of us are positioned into a way that that's why we get underdiagnosed, right? Because we don't match the stereotypical perspective that society holds around ADHD. But my goal and my hope is that a lot of that is shifting. There was something else that you had said around just the interviewing process and how to make that a little bit more accessible, as well. And somebody had asked a question a little bit earlier, if I scroll up, around like, when do you, at one point and during the application process, should you divulge your ADHD diagnosis? So there's a couple of things I want to say about that. So one, I think it's important to recognize from the employer perspective that stop interviewing for skills that aren't required for the position. So like stop, like when going back and thinking about your policies and practices and procedures as from an organizational perspective, like stop testing for skills that aren't needed, right? And so like ask, if like what you mentioned before, like just give the questions in advance. Like if you're, and to allow people to be prepared. And that's really helpful for the neurodiverse communities to be able to have some time to prep before you go into the interview so they can effectively answer questions. But like if you're not in a position where you have to answer questions on the fly, then why are you testing for it? And during the application process, there was that I wanted to say. And then, but also remembering that from the AD, like, you know, from the neurodiverse side too, like as the applicant, like if you don't feel right, or like you're interviewing the company just as much as the company is interviewing you. And so, you know, keep out for your own red flags. Um, and if they're not willing to provide you some information prior to the interview, like is that an organizational culture that you want to work for? And to kind of make those decisions. So to learn a little bit better about how organizations think about neurodiversity. But to answer but go back to the question I was asked about, like whether or not what part of the process you should disclose. When so you don't, I mean, you don't have to disclose it all,
No,
right? And so
no, you don't.
you don't
And
have
there isn't any law in any country that I know of that you have to disclose,
yeah, no,
especially
you don't have to.
in the States and UK. There isn't. You don't have to. You're not. You know, you're not going to sort of. You're not breaking the law if you don't tell somebody that you've got ADHD on the application process, in the interview, or even once you start.
Yeah.
And I think it's such an individual thing. Like I disclose all of the time now. I never used to when I was younger. But I think that a lot of that was around I needed more time to understand my identity and how do I articulate this. I didn't have the language to describe neurodiversity and what it meant to me when I
Mm-hmm.
was in my 20s, for example. I didn't have an ADHD diagnosis, so I didn't have that kind of language anyway. Certainly around my dyspraxia, I didn't know how to describe myself or what I needed from an employer. So yeah, so I think it's so personal to you. It's about you're right. Like it's about, do you feel safe disclosing to
Mm-hmm.
that employer? Because I feel like disclosure, and I write about this in my book a little bit. Disclosure to me is like you're giving someone a precious piece of information, and you're trusting that person to keep it safe and keep you
Mm-hmm.
safe, because disclosure is a really sort of personal thing. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you do you trust that organization or that manager to keep it your like sort of the employer, from the employer's point of view, or if somebody discloses to you, can they trust you? Are you going to keep their information safe? Or are you going to make them feel safe?
Right.
Right.
And um, so just specifically in the United States, prior to getting to the job, you do not have to disclose to ask for accommodations. However, once you do get the job and you're working, if you want to access accommodations, then you have to disclose. And so I think that's just, I don't know how it works in the UK. Um,
Fairly similar. Well, I think disclosure it makes it easier to ask for adjustments. So if you want regional adjustments, um, in terms of the law, so we've got the Equality Act in the UK. So yes, basically, if you want to be protected under the Equality Act, disclosure is, you don't have to disclose. If your ADHD doesn't impact you in work, or you don't feel that you need anything, or your employer has universal design in place and you feel included, there isn't really any need to disclose. But yes, I think, and it is such a personal decision, and it's about psychological safety and
yeah,
what yeah, I disclose on application form now, because I'm like, well, if somebody is going to discriminate against me, I'd rather not work for them. I've got that kind
right.
of mindset, because I feel like if they're going to use that as a negative thing, or have
Right.
unconscious bias around what ADHD is or what they think it is, then that's probably not a safe place to work for me. But I know not everybody can do that. So yeah, it really
Yeah.
is personal.
And I would also say, like, just to reiterate, so like in the U.S., under the American Disabilities Act, you do not have to disclose to get access to accommodations during the application process. Just specifically, you don't have to. So, but you can still ask for accommodations, but you don't have to tell them that you have a disability or what the accommodations are for. But the other thing that I was going to say too, just related to just disclosure and just the interview process, like if I'm applying, I mean, I'm clearly in the world, as I have announced to the world that I'm an adult with ADHD, right? And
Well,
so
I have too. So I've not, like, people can Google me and, like, so I don't have a choice.
exactly. And so it's like if you're
So
now,
that
if I'm interviewing for a position,
yeah.
I mean, at this point, if you don't know that I'm gonna, like, I have identify as an adult with ADHD, and then you still don't provide like a safe space that for neurodiversity, like I don't even understand why you're interviewing me. Like if you're not, if as you know what I mean, like if I'm because I'm so public with it, right? So like you are informed already that I'm going to be expecting you as an organization to be able to provide an inclusive environment when it comes to neurodiversity spaces. So if you can't offer that for me or make that clear even throughout the interview process, then I don't like there's no reason for us to be talking at this point. Um, and that's just because that's just where I'm at with my own ADHD journey. And so I think it also depends on like where you are. I think within your own
Definitely.
journey of self and like awareness and acceptance, because it's a shock at first, like if you're especially if you're getting diagnosed later, right? Like if you're getting diagnosed later in life, you kind of have to go through this whole
Yeah.
acceptance process.
It's that grief
And in some
cycle, really, isn't it? You sort of like reevaluate your life under this
yeah,
new
your whole life.
lens. Yeah, yeah.
Somebody asked, what is universal design and what type of accommodations can you request?
Okay, so basically, so universal design is essentially designing spaces to include everybody. So universal, an example of universal design. So if we think about physical design, you've got an office space.
Mhm.
So universal design, you might have within your office quiet spaces for people to go. For
Mhm.
example, if people get overwhelmed or they get sort of experience sensory overload, you might have software on your computer. So not everybody benefits from software, but some people do. So you might have software that might support people
Mhm.
without people having to go through a long process to get that software for their specific computer. Uh, a really basic example of universal design is installing a lift. So obviously that's not for, but that lift can support everybody,
Right.
as I mentioned before. So yeah, so really it's just kind of looking at and then away from that, like physical spaces, universal design is around looking at policies and making your environment and your workplace culture as well. Sort of workplace culture is really important, inclusive for everybody.
Mhm.
And its practices, and it's looking at training, and it's looking at having that psychologically safe environment and designing it not just physically, but policies, culture, and just safety as well. So it is kind of a whole design process about how do you create this workplace environment, this team where everybody can feel they can be themselves, and you can get the best out of people as well. And
Mhm.
the second part of the question, so what type? It depends. This really really depends on you. It depends on
Yeah.
the individual and what you need. And I think universal because now can put some policies in place so that everybody can feel safe and comfortable and not have to ask for the really basic things. For example, like interview questions in advance would be an example of universal design, giving that to
Yeah.
everybody. Um, but I think really it's just kind of I'd advise anybody who is thinking about what can they request is to think about, well, what are my strengths? What am I really, really good at? And start with that. Because
Mhm.
I think it's really difficult. We always look at our, like, I don't like the word weaknesses, but like, challenges.
Yeah.
It's very easy to, people have often used deficit-based language towards neurodiversity. Like they can't do this, they struggle with this, they're
Mhm.
gonna need help with this. It's all very, when I was younger, it wasn't like, oh, Alice is great with this. Like I had a, so in the kind of special education needs department within school, I used to have lots of meetings, and one of my targets was needs to get better at maths, and that was my target for 5 years. Like, it didn't help me. It was just like it wasn't positive. There wasn't a lot of talk about what I was good at. So
Yeah.
yeah. So where was I going? So yeah, just think about what are you good at? What are your real strengths, and then think about what challenges might you have that might take you longer to like getting to where you want to be within your career, and think about those challenges. And so for example, if I was doing this one exam, I would talk about processing information is a challenge I have, and a lot of people do.
Mhm.
So an accommodation or an adjustment around that would be things backed up in writing. um, for example, if I'm in an interview, so I have if you have a virtual interview, so instead of somebody just asking the question to you and you're expected to remember it, having that question written in the chat box so I can have more time to process it. It might
Right.
be more time to read something.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
I was at school at university, I used to have extra time in exams because I needed the extra processing time. So really,
Yeah.
it's really sort of it's very dependent on what you need. Accommodations might also be physical things like noise cancelling headphones
Mm-hmm.
to block out background noise if you're in a really busy noise office environment. There's lots of different assistive software as well that you can get that might help. For example, like speech to text, like I think Dragon. I'm not sure what sort of software used in the US.
There's
That kind of
there's so many. I have, if you're looking for a link of different web-based tools to use, I have one. Just send me a DM and I can send you access. I can give you access to the resources that I have available. But something else that came into mind, the combining like workplace, thinking about workplace accommodations, and then also universal design is one, what you mentioned, like if you're having a virtual interview, being able to just put the questions in the chat, but then also asking if you can transcribe the conversation because it's like, when you're watching TV, just am I really watching it if the closed captions aren't on? So,
yeah.
the same thing. So like sometimes like if you're in the interview and you find yourself getting distracted, knowing that you have a live transcription happening, that you can be like, okay, what did they say? And so that you can go back and kind of read it to get some clarification, is also helpful. But then, different and asking companies around the AI policies also and thinking, and some companies have, in my opinion, like I can understand the reasoning why they are not utilizing AI. But then there's other agencies that is just because they just don't understand it or they're scared of it and that kind of thing, right? And so there's like, are you letting fear drive your policies and practices, or are you letting like real reasons,
Yeah.
um, like actual concerns that are not based out of conspiracy theories? And so AI can also be really helpful for like working for an organization, like being able to have access to AI can support you in the interview process and in the when you actually get hired. Like some companies actually do have policies around accessing and utilizing AI to fill out your applications or to create your resume or to create your cover letter. Like they don't want you to do that for whatever reason. And but it just all kind of depends what you're walking into and what their policies and practices are, and then you can ask for things that are going to be supportive for you. But really understanding what your weaker and your stronger executive functions are is really helpful. So like that's the work that I do with my clients. It's like thinking about what are your strengths, what are your values, but then also we are all human, regardless of neurodiverse or not. We're all human and we all have a brain, and everybody has weaker executive functions. Like this isn't, it's not abnormal for people to, like, nobody's going to be great at everything. Like we don't even use our full brain, right? And so that's just the reality. And so thinking about it as like normalizing the fact that there are stronger and weaker executive functions that exist for everyone, but like, do you know what yours are? And if you do, and how they, not only do you know what they are, but you also know how they impact your work for that particular job. And also being really clear about that. And so like, if you're doing one-on-one coaching with me, or if you're in my group coaching program, then you have access to tools that help you figure that out. And so that's just kind of a plug for my plug for my coaching program and for my one-on-one coaching. But yeah, so we talk about your executive functions and what your stronger and weaker ones are, and we can get really granular and really detailed around what will work. Like, so for example, like fluorescent lighting, thinking about universal design and creating inclusive environments. Fluorescent lighting, like, it doesn't work. I don't know who fluorescent lighting is designed for. I honestly don't. And I'm not going to research it. So if anybody that's listening to this knows why like fluorescent lighting is a thing, but it's not a good thing for like us, right? So like we love like being able to have actual some natural light and just or soft lighting or something. And if you're suffering from migraines and or anxiety, like having those fluorescent lights may not be really supportive of you. And so from a universal design perspective, it's like, how are you adjusting lighting within your work environment in order to support everybody?
remember actually just on that lighting, at a previous workplace several years ago now. So there was somebody, she wasn't neurodivergent, but she really struggled with the bright light because she had a visual difficulties essentially.
Mhm.
So half the office had the lights turned off, and then the other half had them turned on. But she
Mhm.
still had to walk. I didn't understand why they couldn't just change the lighting because
Uh-oh. I think you.
didn't make sense. But yeah, so things like that, people think about, oh, they're doing a really good thing by making sure the lights are turned off. But
Mhm.
then that isn't really, yeah, maybe thinking about what can you do more long term. There will be other people in the office who struggle with the lighting too, who might maybe haven't verbalized that as well. So yeah, just like thinking about, yeah, how you can
Yeah.
get more than halfway, I think.
Right. So, like, from the organization perspective, thinking about lighting and how it impacts people's productivity, but then also from the neurodiverse perspective, like, do you even know how lighting impacts you? And impacts your productivity. So, like, you have some education to do on your own end to really better understand how lighting can impact your productivity. And as well as organizations have some work to do to better understand how lighting is impacting the productivity of their
Yeah,
employees as well. And, find a happy medium or have some room for flexibility there. And so, like, do you have your own office? You can just not turn them on and be able to bring in your own lighting, or can you move, or is an accommodation just to move to an office that has natural lighting?
yeah,
um, and so, depending on the organization, depending on your need, you can ask for those things.
yeah, yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, and it is a learning thing, and I'm probably, I'm probably further on along in my learning journey, having written a book and speaking to lots of people and engaging with different people in the neurodivergent community than some people. But yeah, it is really like learning what you need and how your brain can work best. And some even now, sort of some days I'm like, oh yes, I could do that. That'll be great. And you just have these kind of light bulb moments.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's about working with you and being able to, and I think it's a skill as well, like being able to communicate with with your line manager, like what you need.
Mhm.
Um, and my line manager, my previous one, was really great. She'd be saying, "Well, what do you need, Alice? You tell me," and she'd give me that space
Yeah.
to tell her, tell her essentially. And she's great with praise. We all like to be celebrated. We all like to sort of be told that we're doing great work, and I think it's really important to value um, I get the benefits of praise and the benefits of celebrations in the workplace, and having that protected time to tell your line manager, people you line manage, or colleagues in staff meetings, to celebrate each other and
Mhm.
big each other up. Because we all need that. We all need that kind of to motivate us to do more things at work as well. So yeah, definitely celebrations are a key thing, I think,
Yeah.
for all of the people, all brains.
Agreed. Agreed. um I want to say the other thing that came in mind for me is when thinking about specifically neurodiversity in the workplace. So there's some research around, well, at least in the States, that like almost 70% of the workforce is neurodiverse in one way or the other. And the reality is like you should actually be doing programming around neurodiversity than neurotypical because it's actually the majority.
Yeah,
Um, and you know, and I don't know what's going on over there in England, but in the United States, there's straight chaos when it comes to acceptance. And there's a lot of misinformation around neurodiversity. There's a lot of misinformation going around about autism right now.
you've got
And
you've got extra challenges as well, haven't you, politically and
yes, so there,
yeah,
there's a lot of chaos
yeah,
currently happening in, in,
yeah.
in this particular
Chaos
space.
is the word. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, like I don't know how else to describe it. It's
yeah,
kind of like
yeah,
without using a lot of profanity words. Um, but it's so important to be able to highlight facts about neurodiverse employees and how beneficial they are and we are to the work worlds and the work environment, and how powerful being able to access our brains is for organizations. And like that's the other thing, like like the world needs a neurodiverse brain. Like we can't all think the same.
Yeah.
We can't do all things the same, right? So like that's what allows innovation and creativity and growth and change, right? And so
Yeah.
being able to celebrate that, like, you know, it is Autism Awareness Month, and autism is currently being attacked at the moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
in a really harmful way.
Really. Yeah.
But you know, lifting our autism brothers and sisters up today because of the commentary that's been happening in the States, and hopefully it's not bleeding over into Europe either.
Yeah. And I think
Um,
it's really scary how people who have got a lot of power, and I think, power and words and communication is power. And I felt, I had, when I wrote this book, I felt like I had the power to write my book and share with words. Being able to kind of communicate through words is a really powerful thing to do and have that
mhm.
platform. But I think also, if people do that in the wrong way, it can have the wrong kind of influence, and it can have a really, a real sort of negative impact on people. That we've only just like within the last few years sort of having more like conversations around neurodiversity and ADHD. Like 10 years ago, you know, um, you know, 20 years ago, we weren't having these conversations because um, people were. It was lots of negative connotations around ADHD, and
Mhm.
I just feel like a lot of the conversations in the media, but also around over in the UK, there's been some documentaries around specifically ADHD and medication and
Yeah.
stigmatizing that. And I'm sure there's obviously similar dialogue over in America, and I think that has a real negative impact on yeah,
Yeah.
us, yeah, the community
Yeah.
really.
And you know, that's why I want to do these. I like to have these IG lives, right? And so I am glad that people are able to participate in having these conversations, to be able to kind of, you know, to bring guests on that really talk about this content and the importance of um, acceptance, and the importance of recognizing people's strengths, and the importance of also building in some strategies to adjust with some of the real challenges that are happening for people, right? So like it's not all roses, um, and there are challenges that do occur, but it's so important to be able to have that balance, and to create some space to be able to talk about this. In an honest way, with also people that know what it is that they're talking about, and not and, you know, not just have an opinion, but people that have done the research and in our are educated in this particular space, right? And
And it's
so
very easy to formulate opinions and post that online. Very easy.
it is
Um,
very
a
easy.
lot of opinions, a lot of opinions aren't based on fact. Um, you know.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm so glad that we had this conversation. I do want to make sure that the audience, like you, that we have like the link to your book, and so to make that available for people as well, and to really dig into some of the work that you're doing in the neurodiversity and workplace space. And then for those that are following me, we actually tonight are doing a workshop around managing your retirement, or thinking about retirement and ADHD. And so we have a financial advisor coming in this evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, and he is going to be talking about like what to think about when it comes to planning your retirement. And I'm going to come in with the ADHD content and say like, okay, this is why planning for retirement is hard for the ADHD brain, but here's some things that you can do to make it a little bit easier. So we're going to be talking about that tonight. And then next week, I'm hosting a workshop, a 2-day workshop actually, around accomplishing your goals with ADHD. And so first day is some educational stuff and some coaching. And then the second day is around application and coaching. And so taking what we learned and putting it in practice is day 2. So we're going to be doing that next week. And so just continue to follow me around. Other things are going to be coming up over the course of the year, so that we can get you ready for your career, and making sure that you are accomplishing your goals and achieving the success that you want for your life, and for your career.
Great.
That's my mini commercial.
Can I just also quickly say, so around my book, so Neurodiversity in the Workplace. So my name's Alice Hewson, How to Create an Inclusive and Safe Environment and that's the front cover. I think it's probably back to front on the screen. But it's available on Amazon, both in the US and UK. And you can also, so it's Barnes and Noble. It's able to, you can order it directly from there. So it'll be, you can get it, yeah. And any good bookshop you can order it in from. It's sort of everywhere. It should be, I hope. But also, just to say, also, I'm available for speaking events around neurodiversity in the workplace, both remotely, so for organisations, if you want sort of talks, I can sort of design bespoke talks around sort of the needs of your organisation. So yeah, so remotely and also in person, but the in-person one's sort of UK based. But yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, so I'm happy to travel for in-person talks. But yeah, do get in touch and find me on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. And
then this replay will be on YouTube, and so we'll post all of your links. As well to make it easier. But if not, go to her page, and she has the links on her page as well. And so do I. Like if you're looking for the workshop information for today and for next week, then they're on my profile. But if you can't find them, then just send me a message and I'll send them to you. And otherwise, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you had a good time.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely. Yeah.
You're welcome. All right. Have a good night. And I'm going to have a good afternoon.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.